heat waves, drought, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, blizzards, bitter cold. Extreme weather has an incredible impact on people across the globe. On Mount Washington, our scientists brave some of the worst weather on the planet to improve our understanding of our warming world.
Mount Washington Observatory Science in the Mountains lecture series. My name is Brian Fitzgerald, and I'm the Director of Education here at Mount Washington Observatory. Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight and telling us all about the weather forecasting experience for the maritime community is Director of Operations for Weather Routing Inc., Jeremy Davis, who will be joining us in just a little bit here. Before we get to that, though, if you're not already familiar with us, Mount Washington Observatory is a nonprofit, member-supported organization with a mission to advance the understanding of the forces that create Earth's weather and climate. We do that by operating our Summit Weather Station with around-the-clock weather observation and forecasting services, by conducting research and product testing, and by developing and offering innovative educational programs. If you have questions for Jeremy, for tonight's speaker, and you're joining us through Zoom, please feel free to use the Q&A button that can be found at the bottom of your Zoom screen there. We'll collect questions throughout the whole program here and make sure we have time for a live Q&A just at the end of the program. So make sure you get your questions in. If you're joining us either on the recording, watching us on the recorded Facebook Live, or elsewhere on YouTube, feel free to join us for a live program next time. We'll try and get to as many comments or questions that you leave in any of the comment sections. But if you'd like to join us for a live program, please make sure to register over at mountwashington.org. Alrighty, so before we get into things, we do have a poll for everyone joining on Zoom this evening. I'll go ahead and launch that right now. So if you're joining on Zoom, you will see some poll questions pop up here. The first one, always curious where folks are joining from. Maybe it's a state within New England, perhaps it's outside of New England, or maybe even outside the country. Always curious. And then we have a couple trivia questions here from our speaker, Jeremy. The first one being, what is the Beaufort scale? Is it a measure of relating wind speed to observed conditions at sea or on land? Is it an alternative means of categorizing hurricane intensity? Is it a measure of ocean current speed? Or a means of estimating vessel speed based on wind directions and currents? And then finally, our last question here, a swell period. A swell period is a measure of what? Is it distance, time, speed, or height? All right, get your answers in for all of you who'd like to participate. And we'll go ahead and close the poll here in just a few seconds. 3, 2, 1. Alrighty, let's see. End the poll there and share out some results. All right, well, this evening, New Hampshire coming out in front here, more than a third of you joining from the Granite State. Lots of great representation across New England, including from Massachusetts as well. And then a quarter of you joining from outside of New England, and even an individual joining from outside the country. Welcome to all of you, no matter where you're joining from. And then on our trivia questions, more than half of you said the Beaufort scale is a measure of relating wind speed to observed conditions at sea or on land. Okay, we'll see how that holds up. And then finally, for a swell period, almost half of you said it's a measure of time. Almost a third of you said it was a measure of height. And still quite a few of you thought maybe it's distance. I don't know. We're going to have to find out here from our speaker tonight. And that being said, I would love to turn things over. I'd love to welcome our speaker, Jeremy Davis from Weather Routing Inc. tonight. Hey, Jeremy, how's it going?
Hey, Brian, doing great. Glad to be here. And thank you in Mount Washington for inviting me to talk tonight.
Yeah, well, I'd also be remiss without the introduction. Should get this out of the way. You were an intern once for the observatory, weren't you?
I sure was. Yeah, it was summer of 1999, best summer of my life. I got to intern at the summit from May to August. I was a student up at Linden State College in Northern Vermont at that time, and it was the 7 best weeks of my career here. It was really amazing as a student to be able to get up there. Got to see some just incredible weather. Got to see snow in May and severe thunderstorms throughout the summer. Just an overall amazing experience. Great people up there, great volunteers, great staff, and really helped me out for my career to have that experience.
Well, yeah, we love seeing where people go as as they move along in their careers, and we're all fascinated. You came up highly recommended. You and your work at your company of what impact you can have with meteorology in the broader world. So, hey, without further ado, I've done enough talking. We'd love to hear from you and all about your work and experiences. So take it
Great. Yeah, thanks, Brian. So thanks everybody for joining tonight. So I am an operations director of operations here at Weather Routing Incorporated. We're located in Glens Falls, New York. If you wonder why a marine weather forecasting company is located in Glens Falls, New York, it's because thankfully with technology now we can pretty much forecast around the world pretty much from anywhere, and it's a beautiful area to live in. Our office is very close to the Hudson River here in New York. It's the part of the Hudson that's a little bit more narrower than a lot of you might know about for New York City. Again, it's a beautiful area to live in. So yeah, I'm a director of operations. I started off working at Weather Routing as a junior meteorologist and worked my way up through the company through meteorologist, senior meteorologist, and up to operations manager, and now to a director of operations on the yachting, sport fishing, and sailing division within the company. I went to Linden State College in Northern Vermont, graduated from there in the year 2000. It's a very good school for that. It's now called the State University of Vermont at Linden. And again, yeah, went there from 1996 to 2000. I did an internship first at the Blue Hill Observatory outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And then I interned at Mount Washington there in the summer of 1999. I ended up getting hired at Weather Routing Incorporated before I graduated from college. So I had the job waiting for me after I graduated, and I've been here ever since. It's been a great company to work for. It's grown quite a bit. We started off when I started working there with just 8 employees, and now we're at 60. So we've grown quite a bit and have really drastically increased the number of clients and the types of clients that we have. So in the presentation tonight, it's going to be in 2 sections. I'm going to be talking kind of a broad based about the marine forecasting world, tell you a little bit about the types of clients that we serve, talk to you about forecast challenges, talk to you, show you some examples of some forecast products that we create. And then the second half of the presentation will be talking about what it's like to really be out there on the sea on a 59-foot sailboat in the North Atlantic, and the types of weather that we got to see on a really amazing trip, the wildlife that we got to see in the ocean and on land, as well as just the incredible natural beauty of the area from Nova Scotia to Newfoundland. So I hope you enjoy all of that. So I'm going to get my presentation all loaded up here, so bear with me one second. I'm going to get everything all set here, and we should be able to see the presentation. So yeah, this is about forecasting for the maritime community. And what I wanted to show first, though, this is pretty interesting. So just as a personal touch here, my grandmother and her sister got to go hiking at Mount Washington all the time in 1933, 34, 35, in that time frame. And I wanted to share just a couple quick pictures with that, just to show you some really unique historical photos. This is one that she or my great aunt took, and it shows the Mount Washington Observatory on October 14th, 1933, the original building that was up there. And it says sunset after the morning snowstorm. Now, I'm not 100% sure if they hiked on this day or whether they took the Cog Railway up, but regardless, it's a pretty cool photo. We have another picture that was in a photo album from them, and this shows Wendell Stevenson, that was one of the observers. If you look at the date there, November 18th, 1933, and what it says is, what a pack, 75 pounds. He would take the big black cat up. So they had cats back then, and it's in one of those boxes being taken up to the summit. And he'd be ready for the trip up the carriage road. with Mount Washington. Sal, one of the other observers, is meeting him at the halfway house. So they were going to hike up that in the snow there in November. If you see, he's carrying a rifle that was also to protect against bears. So things have certainly changed now for the way that observers get up the mountain. And one of my favorite photos here that they took, this is the observatory, October 12th, 1933. And you see Steve, Sal, and Bob, and it says Mac. Mackenzie was busy radioing. But what's really cool about this photo is that is the majority of the team that recorded the world record wind the following April. So it was very exciting to find out that my grandmother had met the world record wind crew, but before they had measured that wind. So I just wanted to share that. That was one of the photos from the album. Now let's jump to 1999. I thought you might enjoy this. This is from my internship up there. This is Rachel. She was another one of the interns up there with me. So that's me on the right. And we decided we're going to try to fly a kite in 50-mile-an-hour winds during our internship. That went about as good as you'd expect. The kite immediately snapped the moment we tried to fly it, and we went running to go capture it. So that was inside the observatory, the main observing room in 1999 in May. If all of you, some of you, I'm sure, remember Marty on the Mountain, one of the highlights of my first week of being an intern up there was to head over to the radio, to the TV station transmitter next door, and we got to meet Marty, who was an incredibly nice person and welcomed us in. The volunteer for the week is on the right there. She had baked him some fresh cookies, and we gave them to Marty, and he was very excited to have some fresh baked goods while we were up there. So we got to see him do it live, put on his bow tie. And he was just as amazing in person as I know some of you have remembered seeing him when he used to do the live broadcasts from the summit. So that was a pretty cool experience to get to go see that. And one last photo just from 1999. That's May 26, 1999. The summit got about 3 inches of snow. So it was almost June, and it was just really cool to see snow like that on May 26th, especially because we had to head down the mountain that day. It was a Wednesday, and going down the mountain in the truck with chains, and then exiting out at the bottom of the auto road, looking like it was the middle of winter, but it had already warmed up into the 60s at the bottom of the mountain. Ended up heading for the 70s that afternoon. It really warmed up rather quickly. So what a day that was to experience a snow event at the top of the mountain, and then be able to see all the warmer temperatures when I got to the bottom. So I just wanted to share some of those personal photos for you, show you some of my connections, family connections to the mountain. Always loved Mount Washington. It's just such an amazing place. And again, I'm really happy to talk tonight. So a little bit about Weather Routing, the company that I work for. So we were founded in 1961, and we were the first private forecasting company to really do marine weather forecasts back in the day. The company started in New York City and started providing forecasts mostly for the commercial industry, for shipping companies. And when we first started, well before my time, when we first started, they really had to convince the shipping companies and the captains that we could do a good job forecasting and routing from land. And now you got to remember that was certainly before we had a lot of today's modern technology in terms of what we have out there for forecasting. So it took a little bit of convincing, but the company grew over the years. We took on more and more shipping companies. We eventually moved upstate. We moved up towards the Poughkeepsie area and then to the Lake George Saratoga region, where we've moved about 5 different times and expanded each time since we've moved up here. So again, we've gone from 8 forecasters, 8 employees to 60 that we have right now. So what do? We provide weather forecasts and routing and specialized reports for all kinds of clients. They include yachts, mega yachts, super yachts, sailboats of all sizes, sport fishers, cruise ships, commercial vessels, marinas. We even do some offshore wind forecasting as well. So pretty much anything that's out on the water, we provide weather forecasts for. And there's a little picture of a small portion of our office. We actually have, because we have the 2 divisions, we're on 2 different floors in our building, and it's a restored mill building, which is a really interesting historic building. They used to build some of the first automobiles in New York State here around the turn of the last century. Our floors that we have in our building are the original floors from the 1800s when they used to make horse carriages here for like the Vanderbilts and the Whitneys and the Rockefellers and all of them. So it's a really cool historic building in terms of what used to be here and what's here now as a modern weather forecasting company. So as an example of what we try to avoid happening, and this is not something that we had anything to do with, but this is an example of like why a client might want to use us. This was an example from 10 years ago. And it says that it's from a newspaper article that on a bitterly cold day in February, that two gentlemen left Newport, Rhode Island, headed for Bermuda and ultimately to Australia via the Cape of Good Hope. Again, leaving in February to go to Bermuda from New England in a small sailboat, not a good idea. It was a 43-foot custom racing yacht that they had bought on the cheap. And 2 days later, the Coast Guard was rescuing them 150 miles south of Nantucket in 60 knots of wind. It's an entirely preventable situation. If they had contacted a company like ours, we obviously would have told them not to go. And sometimes you can find weather windows to make a trip like that in the wintertime. It's pretty difficult, but we certainly would have recommended them to wait till like April or even May for a better possibility of success. So that's the kind of a situation that we work to avoid so that the clients don't have a surprise, so they can have a safe trip wherever they're going to and from, get there all in one piece, keep their crew safe, help them save money, and have the best possible planning for it. So in terms of our clients and the types of privately owned vessels, this is the side of the company that I do the most work with. So there's 14,000 motor and sailing yachts over 24 meters or about 80 feet in length or so. So there's 14,000 of those across the world. Those include super yachts, sailboats, sport fishers, catamarans, power and sail, pleasure crafts and tugs and all kinds of other types of smaller, more independently owned vessels. And what they do is the captains, and in some cases the owners, if it's a smaller vessel, they reach out to us and we provide weather forecasting and routing to them, again, to get them where they need to go as safely and quickly as possible. And how do we communicate with our clients? Well, the technology has really changed here over the last 25 years since I've worked at weather routing. So at this point, we can pretty much call up a vessel just like any of you would call up someone on your cell phone, and for about that same price. There's voice over internet phones, there's satellite phones. Those used to be very expensive, the satellite phones. They were $5 to $9 a minute. So if you had to call a vessel, you had to be really quick or have them call us. Now with like Starlink and other services, we can talk to these vessels as if we're just talking to someone across town. There's also some text messaging devices that can be used, or WhatsApp, if the vessels are logged on to that, and email. We pretty much will also email the majority of our weather forecasts, or they will call us and we can do a forecast with them over the phone as well. What are some of the vessel concerns that we may have or that the vessels are concerned about? Well, they may have guests on board that are paying very high charter fees. They may have tenders in tow. That's an example of a vessel being towed by another vessel. So sometimes these vessels will go in tandem. Those can be smaller, like shuttle type tenders. If you've ever been on a cruise ship, you've probably tendered to a port before. These tenders will be smaller than that, but oftentimes they can be towed behind a larger vessel. They can have pretty fragile interiors. There's a lot of artwork on board, sculpture work, things like that that cannot withstand a lot of rough weather out at sea. There are time and fuel constraints. Vessels need to get to certain places by certain times, and there's also sometimes limited fuel range, especially for some of the sport fishers or for some of the sailboats. We have to consider different wind angles, which way the wind is hitting a vessel can make all the difference in the world for a sailboat. You want it pretty much close to on the beam at like a 90-degree angle rather than on the nose, which they can't sail into. And some vessels have to arrive at their port at high tide because that's when they can be able to get over certain sandbars or other underwater features to get into their docks. Here's an example of a sample forecast that we would provide to a client. So they pretty much use us whenever they want to. They're not forced to have to get forecasts on a certain schedule. They can reach out at any time, day or night. We never close, and request a forecast to be able to be sent to them. And this is an example of one that would be given to them in writing. So we put the itinerary up there on the top. in this case, West Palm Beach to Newport, Rhode Island as an example. And we talk about how long the trip is, 1,000+ nautical miles, how many hours it is, and so on. Then we do a weather synopsis, which is a weather discussion. A lot of you that are weather enthusiasts have seen maybe perhaps the weather discussions here at the observatory, or you've seen them for the National Weather Service. Each type of weather discussion has to be tailored to the audience. So we have to tell vessels what's going on with weather features, where the fronts are, where the highs are, where the tropical systems, and so on. And then in our conclusions, what we do is we kind of tie those weather features into our recommendations. So if a client says, for an example, let's say they're getting a forecast and they're going West Palm Beach and to Newport, Rhode Island, and they could leave any time between tomorrow and Sunday, for instance, we would help find the best departure date, the best departure time, what route would need to be taken. Do they need to stop along the way? Can they maybe go earlier? Do they really have to? Are they not going to make their deadline? They may have to leave later because the weather isn't going to cooperate. So we spell that all out into the conclusions, and can sometimes validate their request or invalidate it, and then offer something else that might work better for them. Continuing on to the forecast, they get an embedded map that shows the route that they're taking. Like in this example here, we're using the Gulf Stream, which can have a big current boost of 2 to 4 knots to give them a good push going up the East Coast. And then we include some embedded graphics with that. And then we give them the full forecast and the route recommendation. So you'll see in that route recommendation, you get to see that we would have waypoints in there, which are different latitudes and longitudes to go to, and then whether direct routing from a certain point could continue. And then we give them the weather conditions after that by latitude and longitude. So we do wind speeds, directions, wave heights, the directions from those that they're coming from, wave periods. We talk about precipitation, temperatures, and ocean currents, and we show the direction the ocean currents are coming from in this case, so they can see the angles coming from. So what are the other kind of routing challenges that we might have for especially the smaller vessels? Obviously, severe weather. There's a lot of squalls across the world where you can get sudden wind shifts and thunderstorms, and that can cause quite a lot of problems for smaller vessels. They need to be prepared to experience those conditions. Even water spouts, which are pretty common, like in this photo here, you can see an example of a water spout. Tropical cyclones. Obviously, tracking hurricanes, typhoons across the world, tropical cyclones, very important. We have to be able to route around those and to be pretty confident where our system is going to be moving to in the next 4 or 5 days, because we really have to be able to give them plenty of heads up to get around a system, especially a smaller sailboat. They can only go sometimes 5, 6, 7 knots, 6, 7, 8 miles an hour. And so you need to have a lot of time to get away from a system if one is moving towards them. Ocean currents, are they going to be favorable, unfavorable, or average? We would look at those. Icebergs, yes, there's definitely still concerns with icebergs. We can track those where those are. Freezing spray, it's not as much of a concern because a lot of the yachts are not going to be involved in areas farther north at that time of year. But it is something that we would need to keep an eye on, especially for the commercial vessels. Short period seas on the nose, that's waves that are kind of hitting bam, 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 they're going into it. That can be very rough on a vessel. It causes a lot of pitching and can certainly cause a very uncomfortable travel experience. And even things such as lack of wind for sailing yachts, because they want the wind. They just don't want too much of it. They got to find that sweet spot of having enough wind to sail, but not too little sailing to sail at. So we have to worry about sometimes the lack of wind for these vessels. And one of the examples of routing that you can see here, this is a vessel, this was taken yesterday, and this is a route and for a vessel that is a yacht that is crossing the Atlantic in January, and that's usually a pretty tough time of year to do that. They definitely do not have guests on board. It's just the captain and crew, and they're relocating from the Caribbean to head over to the Mediterranean so that they could have some shipyard work done over there for them. But if you can see here, this is a map. This was a forecast product that was valid for next week. Here you can see the vessel's expected location here in yellow, and you can see the green here. That's the vessel's location of when I took this screenshot, because we are actually able to get vessels' positions now very easily. We have, it's called AIS. It's a tracking system for ships at sea. You've seen something similar to airplanes, perhaps, if you use FlightAware, Flight Tracker, those kinds of services. It exists for the marine community as well, and you can see a lot of the vessels and ships all over the whole world. So we're able to get that raw data and be able to know where all of our vessels are pretty much at any moment. So in this case here, you can see this route that we recommended to them actually took them up into the ridge of high pressure here, the semi-permanent ridge that's out there, also known as the Azores High. And we're able to actually get them into some pretty good weather for a long period of time here. And in the long range, it was getting pretty stormy up across the northeastern Atlantic. So you can see at this point, they'll start to get into some higher winds. These are the predicted wind speeds here, going up to 20 knots and maybe some 30 knots at times up here. So in this case, what we might do to this situation is kind of bend their route off to the east and try to take them more south of some of these higher conditions here in the long range. Some stuff we don't need to worry about quite yet. You know, when you start getting 5-6 days out, we're going to be looking at their route, seeing what we could do with it, see how we can make it better. But we don't want to make any rash decisions now if we have plenty of time to change the route later, because these vessels can move faster. They're moving 12, 13, 14 knots, so 13, 14, 16 miles an hour. So they have a little bit more flexibility in terms of making a routing change. But we don't want to do a drastic routing change and add hundreds of miles onto their route that can add a day or two to their travel. So we want to try to be proactive without not trying to overreact about a situation in the long range that will probably change by the time they would get up there anyway. The Gulf Stream, we will certainly be looking at that or other currents around the world. There's another similar current off of Japan, for instance, called the Kuroshio current. There's all kinds of ocean currents all over the whole world. And if we were routing a vessel going northbound, we would try to get them inside the axis of the Gulf Stream here, because they're going to get a pretty good push from that Gulf Stream that can actually save them a lot of fuel and time. But a vessel going the opposite direction, let's say they're relocating from New England and heading on south, they would have to try to avoid the Gulf Stream and might take a more closer inshore route through here to avoid going against the current, which would slow them down, which we would not want to do. So we're looking at currents when we're looking at our routes as well, very closely for that. And then we've also looked at things such as local wind events. What's interesting is across the world, there's some really fascinating wind events that can happen all over the place. And a lot of this is not areas that, they're not areas that are as populated or as familiar to most Americans. But for a lot of our yachts and other vessels, they're crossing those regions. So, for example, this is what they call a Gulf of Tehuantepec surge, or sometimes they call it a Tehuantepecker. Yes, that's the name. And what happens here is this is the isthmus here in Central America. And when there's high pressure building in, as we've had with this cold high pressure that's been coming down in the wake of the storm that affected most of the eastern U.S., it pushes all that high pressure here, and the winds funnel down through this mountain gap here, and then it funnels out on the other side across the Pacific Ocean. And you can really see how quickly those winds increase here, and how much it builds up the significant wave height here, up to like 16 feet in this example. So if you're going along the coast here, you're going to hit literally like a wall of wind. It's also nicknamed the sandblast coast, for instance, where there can be so much sand blowing off the beaches out to sea that it can literally sandblast some of these ships that are going across it. So if we were routing a yacht, let's say they're going from Panama, Costa Rica, heading up to the Baja, we would have them stop before they would get involved with that, because they would be in real trouble if they tried to go across that kind of a wind event. And those other wind events also happen in the Mediterranean. It's called a Mistral there. There's also other local events throughout the world. And that's what's interesting here at our companies, even though we're located in upstate New York, because we do weather forecasting for the whole world, we get to learn about all of these localized events that most people are not terribly aware of. Turning over to commercial vessels. So with commercial vessels, there's 100,000 of those commercial vessels across the world. Those include cargo ships and ferries, cruise ships, tankers, bulk carriers, and barges. So there's a huge amount of commercial vessels, some that are quite large and some that are a lot smaller. And it really is the lifeblood of world commerce. It all happens kind of behind the scenes to most of us, But shipping, commercial shipping is hugely important for the world economy, which would just collapse if it were to stop. So there's just over 10 billion metric tons of goods are shipped around the world every day. It costs right now $10,000 to $20,000 to hire a vessel for the day. A lot of times there'll be different companies will charter a ship to ship their products or to ship a conglomerate of products around the world, and it costs that much just to hire the vessel, not including the fuel, which costs $450 per metric ton of fuel and $600 for diesel. And vessels burn between 20 and 50 metric tons per day. So it's a lot of numbers, but just as an example, a very large container ship that might be 800 to 1,000 feet long, 1 gallon of fuel oil only moves the vessel 80 feet. So you can imagine how much fuel you have to use to move it across the ocean, and how much using a company like us can save them, because even if we save them 10, 20, 30 miles, it's a substantial amount of money that can be saved. Excuse me. So shipping lanes, a lot of you have heard about the shipping lanes. This is an example from marine traffic showing all the different ships across the English Channel. And in this snapshot, just look at how many vessels there are out there. And this is just a small little glimpse of what's going on in the world. And if you can actually see the lanes, you can see the inbound to Northern Europe traffic here on the south side. And you can see the outbound traffic coming in from Scandinavia, North Sea, going outbound into the Atlantic. So you can kind of see they do this. They line up in certain shipping lanes, traffic separation schemes, as they call them, in order to minimize the chance of collisions. But there's also vessels, let's say, going between France and England, and you can see them trying to go across this, and you'll see them kind of come in here where there were gaps in the other ships, so to avoid collisions. So it's fascinating to look at. If you want, go on marinetraffic.com, and you can see all the different vessels around the world. I think you'll all be blown away by how many there are. So this is a map of the worldwide shipping lanes. It's kind of like a heat map of where all the traffic is with all of these. What's fascinating is you can really see, which countries ship to where. You can see how there's a lot from South America, Rio de Janeiro, that goes up to Europe. You can see the traffic from India going to the Middle East and then also up to Europe. You can see the traffic from Asia that comes out, from China, Japan, that comes out here, excuse me, into the Bay of Bengal, and then comes down to South Africa and then spreads out from there. You can see some of the tracks over to Hawaii and across the North Pacific. So you can really see where all the shipping takes place. And you can also see where the shipping does not take place, where there's just not a lot of reasons to, or there's not much land, like here across the Southern Ocean, down closer to Antarctica. There's still some traffic down there to get to all the resupply parts of Antarctica and a few other small islands down there, but it's not much. So what are commercial vessels concerned about? They're concerned certainly about the cost of fuel. They're concerned about something called the ECA, which is the emission control area, to try to minimize emissions that they might have. Freezing spray, passengers on cruise ships. They have strict deadlines for cruise ships. If you've ever been on a cruise ship, you know that you have to arrive at a port at a certain time. You got to worry about air temperature, sometimes the spoiling of goods, piracy, and icebergs. So there's a lot of stuff to worry about. Yes, there is still piracy that does go on in the world, and we get reports from that that we can pass along to our clients. Other types of real-time challenges that there are, there could be large area devoid of ocean buoys. You can see here, like in the southern parts of the Pacific Ocean, there's not a whole lot of buoys, or the southern Indian Ocean, so we don't get a lot of ground truth in that area. Buoys can be out of order, and sometimes the real-time observations from ships just aren't always 100% accurate. So what are the consequences if marine forecasts go wrong? If we're really wrong, there could be some serious consequences. So the worst one, of course, is loss of life. If there's a hurricane that wasn't predicted correctly or wasn't conveyed the risk to a client, there could be a serious problem with that. So it's obviously something that we strive very, very hard to avoid, to make sure our clients are warned as much as possible. And without proper warning and route planning, vessels can be damaged or lost. On yachts, charters can be canceled, and that can lead to a major loss of revenue for the owners. Vessels that are being towed can capsize or sink in periods of heavy weather. Commercial vessels can be delayed, or the goods can be damaged. I'll show you an example of that coming up. Passenger discomfort on cruise ships. If you've ever been on a cruise and you've been in bad weather, that's certainly a problem. And then missing ports of call for cruise ships, which can also affect the local community who is counting on all those passengers there for their livelihoods. Loss of goods. This is an example of a container ship, not one of ours, in the North Pacific that got into a tremendous storm up there, resulting in a lot of the containers collapsing and falling overboard. And they don't sink sometimes. They will float just below the surface. And they become another major hazard for other vessels in that area, these containers kind of bobbing around the ocean until they eventually sink or are picked up. So you can have some serious damage and loss of goods. And these containers carry everything from cars to food to electronics. The salt that we use on our on our roadways are transported by container ships oftentimes. So yeah, we don't want to lose them in a storm. Major damage, another vessel, again, not one of ours, that was damaged during Hurricane Gonzalo in St. Martin in the Caribbean, where the vessel partially sank. And once that happens, the vessel is pretty much at a total loss. Once you get that much seawater into the vessel, it can't be recovered for the most part. In some cases it can, but it's a very high expense to do it. And a lot of times the vessels can just be scrapped. And then you could also have damage if vessels aren't anchored correctly. If we're going to have some high wind events that might capsize a sailboat or have it be dragged ashore by really strong winds. And this is an example of a sailboat that, yeah, once you get that salt water in there, that's pretty much it for the vessel. So those are just some of the consequences if we have a bad forecast. Now, weather patterns change all over the world all the time. What the trick is for a company like ours is we want to call the clients. We want to let them know right away when there has been a change, and they will certainly understand that. They don't expect perfection, but they don't expect surprises. So you want to make sure that they're kept well informed when those situations arise. So now I want to tell you about that sailing trip that I had a chance to do. I was with the sailing yacht Ice Bear, Andy Shell and Mia Carlson, 59-north.com if you want to check them out. They have a couple vessels, and what people do is they travel with them for the experience of learning what it's like to sail out at sea on a sailboat with other people that are learning the same thing. Maybe they've have a sailboat and only sail on lakes, or maybe just do coastal cruising, but they've wanted to go offshore. Maybe they no longer have a vessel and wanted to sail with people and get to travel to some cool destinations. And occasionally they'll also have people on there that have other interests in the sea. Maybe they're a writer, or maybe they're a photographer, or maybe they're a biologist. There could be all kinds of other people that would have the chance to sail with them. And I had an amazing time to get to sail with them on a trip from Lunenburg, Nova Scotia to St. John's, Newfoundland. And what I wanted to show you with this is really what it's like out at sea. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have been on cruises before. You may have been on whale watches. You've probably been out at sea before, but the experience of being on a 59-foot sailboat in the Canadian Maritimes was really special. And I want to show a little bit about what that's like. So the Ice Bear that I was on, it was about 30 years old when I was on that vessel. How old the vessel was. They had a crew up to 9 people. So everybody on board was part of the crew. Again, this wasn't a cruise. It was, you were actually working the vessel, myself included as this trip's meteorologist. There were several bunk rooms, some convertible bunks. There were 2 heads, 2 bathrooms, and there was a galley as well. And that's kind of what the interior looked like. So it was pretty comfortable. Certainly tight quarters, but certainly very comfortable on board down below. And that's what the galley looked like there, so that we could have good meals, and we ate really well on the trip. Good, simple comfort food is what you want out at sea. And what's really cool is you can actually, even if in rough weather, you can still boil water to cook at. You can see the stove here. It's on a bevel edge here. So if it's those big waves, it will actually stabilize and remain perfectly flat, so that you can be able to cook on it. This is the refrigerator here, right in the middle behind the teapot here. And then we would wash dishes in the sink in seawater, and then do a freshwater sanitary rinse for them. So it was a small area to cook in, but we ate really well well on this trip. That's Captain Andy. That's his workstation there, very modern on board there. You can see his satellite phones and communications and radios. You can see his workstation there. So that's a little bit what it's like in his little office, so to speak. We would be on watch as well. So there'd be 4 hours on, then you get 8 hours off. You have 2 to 3 crew per shift, per watch shift. And the captains, Andy and Mia, they would not be on a specific watch, but they would always be assisting and be available at any time if there was an issue. And then there'd be some speed up shifts in the afternoon. We'd eat dinner at 6. The crew would then wash the dishes. And one thing I learned on board there is you try to get as much sleep as you can in your off time. You don't want to miss anything, but you're going to be up, awake and out and about at all kinds of strange hours. So any chance you get to sleep, whether it's 11 in the morning or 11 at night, you try to get some sleep and get plenty of rest. So when you're on watch, what do? You have to learn how to steer the vessel, keep it on a certain course, be on the lookout for objects in the water. One thing I learned about being on the ocean in the North Atlantic is there's a lot of stuff in the water. There's large fishing nets, there's trash, even when you can't see land, and they kind of come up out of nowhere. So you have to keep a very close eye on that. You have to keep an eye out on AIS to be able to see what other vessels might be out there. You have to get the next crew up. You got to monitor sails, and there's other tasks involved with that. So that's me at the helm. When I was doing steering, the autopilot wasn't working for this trip, so we had to manually steer, which was a great experience. We got to eat pretty good food again. Breakfast, cold cereal, hot coffee, fruit, leftovers, toast. Lunch, you typically had wraps, and fruit, nuts, snacks like that, with candy, nuts, trail mix, lots of water and coffee. You would also try to stay very hydrated, which would help with seasickness, along with medication to prevent seasickness, which I had to take because it was definitely get pretty seasick. But having lots of fluid was very important while you're out there. And this was our crew having dinner when we were anchored one night. So we see like chicken, broccoli, and ziti, something, or chicken, broccoli, and pasta. So something nice and hearty and filling and tasty. That's what we would typically eat, and we'd all talk about the day when we'd all be having dinner. Safety was really important on board. You always had to be clipped in. You couldn't go to the front of the ship without letting the captain know because you can't see if someone falls overboard there. And you always had to have your life jacket on, of course, at all times. Falling overboard on a sailboat is extremely dangerous. The water temperature is very cold. So you have to have the life jacket on. You always have to be clipped in so you can't fall overboard. And certainly no alcohol when you're at sea. You can't have anybody compromised by having a couple drinks. Because it's just, if there's an emergency, that person is not going to be very helpful. So definitely no alcohol when you're out at sea. So it's like to be clipped in. It's almost like you're climbing a mountain. You keep clipping yourself in, plenty of places to do so along the way. And just an example of me clipped in with one of the amazing views that we got to see. Yes, that is a real iceberg, and that's me clipped in there so I don't fall overboard. But what an experience to actually get to see real icebergs. Very exciting, and I'll show you some more shots of that here coming up. Some daily observations. It was hard to sleep. Could be pretty loud. You couldn't really take a shower on board. We got one hose down we were able to do during the middle of the week, but it was cold out for the week, so we weren't really sweating that much. You just had to be really careful with your balance and making sure that you're always holding on to something because a wave could knock you over, and you don't want to fall and get injured. We did a weather briefing on board. We were able to download some raw forecast models. I was able to help give the weather briefing out there. So it was really an interesting chance to see what it's like out at sea doing the briefing and working on it on a real-time basis and seeing how accurate it was or wasn't. But for the most part, the forecasts were pretty accurate. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we experienced here coming up. That's our first sunset on watch. If you look very closely in the distance, you can see the coastline of Nova Scotia here with the sun setting on it. Looks very warm and tropical. This was at the end of June in 2019. You'd think June would be nice out. Nope, it was about 40 degrees when we took this photo. It was quite chilly up there off the Canadian Maritimes. We had a great shot of a moonrise. Seeing the moonrise like this when it was bright orange, it was a really weird experience to see that. It was so clear, and it took us a minute to actually figure out what the heck this orange globe was that was showing up on the horizon. But it was a moonrise. And you can see the different thermal profiles here close to the surface of the ocean, kind of warping the view of the moon, which was pretty interesting. So now I want to show you, we were able to send up the drone to get to see what it was like out at sea here. What's interesting with the drone being launched at sea is that unlike land, you're moving. So drones are programmed to return to their starting position, so that it had to be disabled. Otherwise, it would land in the ocean, you know, a quarter, half mile back. But I thought you might enjoy what it's actually like to see this kind of footage of our sailboat out at sea. The sound may not come through as well, but I think the video will, and I'll talk over it a little bit here. So there's the video of that. One thing that's interesting is you can really see how alone we were. It's almost like a wilderness out at sea there. That's Andy controlling the drone. And you can see how chilly it is. We're all dressed like it's winter, even though it's the end of June. And what's great about this shot is to me, it almost looks like the start of a movie or something. Yeah, Andy's really good at cinematography, and how exciting it was to get that shot.
But the sun it never sets the lads, nor darkness in the sky. And it's here on me, lads, let your hearts never fail. For the bodies in the diamond go fishing for the whale.
And these are kind of views that just 10 years ago you had hired helicopter for, so pretty cool to be able to see that.
When the shores are cold about the man, the salt is running. Oh, don't you think of it, lads, for you.
Here comes the drone. You can see how difficult it was to catch it, but did catch it.
Let your hearts never fail. For the bodies set the dive and go to fishing for the whale.
You can see yours truly here on the back here, a little protected from the wind. Time for another cup of coffee. So.
Yeah.
So that's an example of what it's like out at sea from the perspective of a drone. The next morning we had a very cold sunrise. You can see how fogged over the shield was, the windshield was there. And then we got to see some humpback whales. We could see in the distance, we could see the blowhole, the spout going off on it. It was really amazing. And they came over to our vessel and they played around the sailboat for over an hour, kind of curious about us. So this was pretty amazing. I'll show you a video of that here too.
Oh, wow.
So really amazing to get to see humpback whales out at sea. Just beautiful animals. And once they realized we were no threat to them, I swear they gave us a show. So we had started down in Nova Scotia here, and we were going to be heading up to St. John's, Newfoundland, which would have taken about 4 days. But we had some time, up to 5 days, for alternate plans. So the south side of Newfoundland is a really interesting place, and it's a place that's very, very difficult to get to. You can really pretty much only get there by vessel or by helicopter for some of the inland ports here. So we decided, because there was a storm coming, a gale coming, that we're going to be going to Hare Bay, which is one of these fjords here on the south side of Newfoundland. So we started sailing up there, and this is the approach to Hare Bay. We were having some very nice weather ahead of time. It was very calm waters. The waves were like 3 inches tall at this point. But this is a real fjord, so we sailed up the fjord, and they sent the drone up to that here as well. So you can see our sailboat here in the center of the screen. And if you notice, the topography might look a little similar. I think those of you who have been above tree line in Mount Washington will think that this looks very much like the White Mountains. And indeed it is. It's the same landmass. It's the same kind of granite bedrock that's out there, and some of the same tundra plants that you might see on Mount Washington or nearby. So it's when you're up there, it's really interesting to get to see some of the same, type of the same type of land features and plants that we would see up in the highest terrain of the White Mountains. This was sailing downwind up the fjord, and then there's a spot in the fjord there where the fresh water coming in from a waterfall is kind of meeting the salt water, and you can actually see the line where that happens, where the tide goes in and out, and we'll push that kind of forward and backwards. Pretty fascinating. And then this was at the end of the fjord. We anchored up farther away from this. We took the dinghy up, and then we took we took the dinghy to the base of a place called Morgan Falls. Now, when we're up there, there was no trail map, there's no kiosk, there's no road, there is nothing. This is pure wilderness. We did not know exactly what to expect, except for a description in an old guidebook. So my first steps into the province of Newfoundland was on a dinghy getting off right here on the side of this amazing waterfall, which looks a little squashed here in this photo, but it's 150 feet tall. So we got to go explore and walk up that. And you can see it's actually not that bad of a hike to go up the side of it. Just an amazingly, stunningly beautiful place that was really accessible only by boat. So we anchored up that night because we knew a storm was coming, and then we had a chance to relocate within the fjord to another northwest arm, as it was called. The next morning, you can just see how completely dead calm it was, calm before the storm. So we relocated to another location in the fjord, and then we did a celestial navigation workshop, and that's how you can use the position of the sun and moon and stars to be able to identify your latitude and longitude. So we were able to do a workshop with that and use lots of math and formulas to be able to determine, using an example of a previous sighting, where we were located. So when you go sailing, sometimes the systems might fail and you might need to use this to actually find out where you are. So the next day, we can see this was one of the gales that was moving up. Here is Newfoundland. Here's Nova Scotia. Here's Maine. Here comes the low pressure area, and it was producing a lot of rain and southerly winds along the coast, and a lot of fog as well. You can see the visibility map here. We're showing areas of pretty much 0 nautical miles visibility. And you could see that the low here, the gale had produced some southerly seas coming in here, south-southeast at about 4 to 6 feet, which is moderate, not too bad. So we were going to relocate. There's a small fishing village that was just down about 20 miles or so from where we were staying. It's a completely isolated place. They can only get there by a small ferry or by helicopter, no roads. But because it had rained all night, that rain has nowhere to go off of all that granite. And you can get the most amazing waterfalls you could ever imagine. So I wanted to show you one of the videos. And we were about 700 feet of water at this location. It just drops straight down. And so that water has nowhere to go, but just to form those just amazingly beautiful waterfalls. And then we were sailing out to go to this small fishing outport called Francois. It's not Francois, it's Francois. And this is what it's like to sail in 0 miles visibility and light rain. You can see it's pretty miserable. We're pretty wet. It's pretty chilly. But navigation is also done using an iPad or other similar tablet. So Andy there is navigating using that in our current location. So there's a lot of cool modern technology that you can do while you're out there out at sea. This is that small town called Francois. You can see our sailboat. We docked here. There's only about 70 people or so that live there full time. There's a general store, and that's about it. But it was a beautiful place to visit, and we were the first non-commercial vessel to show up for the year, and they were very excited to have some visitors. The storm strengthened and then pulled away off to the north. And so the next day, though we were out of time, we had to get over to St. John's. So we're over here. The good thing is the storm was lifting away. We knew the weather was going to be rough on the backside, but slowly improving. And a lot of the crew wanted to experience what it's like to sail in heavier weather without having any kinds of, not on the first time by themselves. So we decided to make a go for it to St. John. St. John. So we're exiting the fjord here. This is leaving the small town of Francois, heading on out. Because I was the meteorologist, Andy said I was up first at the helm. So there I am steering the vessel in a gale, which was an amazing experience, something I'll never forget. Kind of storm chasing in a different way, reminding me a lot of being on Mount Washington. We have 40, 45 mile an hour winds up there all the time. And I want to show you what it's like. I took a short video of that. This is what it's like to be sailing in a gale. See us heeling over. Pretty neat experience. You get to see that. That happened here off the southern coast of Newfoundland. And this piece here, if you can see where my arrow is, that is actually France. That's Saint Pierre and Miquelon. They are two French islands, kind of like our Hawaii is to the United States. But this is the last piece of New France in North America. They are French. They are on the Euro and they're on Paris time. We did get to sail by those, so I did get to say I could sail by France during this trip. But we didn't have a chance to stop because the weather was too bad. Plus, we didn't have enough time. This is what a berg report map would look like. This shows the number of iceberg sightings within a degree of latitude, longitude. So we knew because we were coming up over here that we were going to be possibly seeing, there was 40 to 50 reports of icebergs. And so we knew they were going to be coming. So we had extra watches and kept a very close eye on our radar. I, of course, was very thrilled that we were going to have that chance to see icebergs. I'd always wanted to see a real one, and we certainly did get to see them. One of the ones that we got to see was a pinnacle iceberg, so named because it has actual peaks and pinnacles with it. It's just an amazing shot that we got with the drone, and I want to show you the video of that. You can see our sailboat here at the distance, or actually not the distance, it's actually right pretty much next to it, although we were safely away from it, so it wouldn't cause any issues for us. And one thing about icebergs that's interesting, I think we all have the idea of icebergs as being kind of this stationary object. You think of the Titanic, it's not moving, but icebergs are very dynamic. Waves break on them, they're moving, they're a moving object. They're also an amazing piece of art. The ice, the colors of the ice, the cracks, the crevices, the peaks. It's one of nature's most amazing pieces of work, and to get to see it in person was just incredible. And we flew the drone over it, so I think you'll enjoy this video. See some of the waves breaking on it. You can see some of the pieces that have broken off pieces. There's our sailboat. So everybody watch here in the center. There's Newfoundland in the background. Watch the wave. So you can see the wave, the ocean just crashing on board on top of the iceberg. So really, really something. And then to wrap up the presentation, the trip, we sailed into St. John's. It's a major city, capital of Newfoundland and Labrador. This is Marconi Hill, where they sent some of the first wireless signals here from that. This is approaching St. John's, the harbor area, and when we docked the sailboat, we docked it next to a parking garage, which was quite the culture shock after seeing humpback whales and icebergs and small fishing towns and waterfalls. And then here we are, we get to dock next to a parking garage. So it was really quite an experience with that. So with that, I will conclude the presentation here. I know Brian's coming back, and there's the contact information. There's my email address too. So it's jdavis@wriwx.com. I'd be happy if you had any questions that don't get answered tonight, if you want to reach out, and go check our website here as well. So I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Wow, thanks so much, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for sharing contact information. Yeah, as Jeremy mentioned, that was a great time. Get some questions in. We already have quite a few great questions for you as well. So let's just get into it and see how many we can get to. The first one here was from David. Asked it a little bit earlier on, but they were curious, is it possible to forecast the probability of rogue waves?
Yes, actually, we've come up with one of our forecasters here, Brandon, in our IT department, actually came up with a rogue wave index that we use in-house proprietary to kind of look at what's the likelihood of experiencing rogue waves. So those are waves that are twice the significant wave height. Basically, they're going to happen when you have two different wave sets or more that are coming from different directions, different periods, and it's constructive interference that can take place, and you can certainly get those rogue waves. So it's been pretty good. We put that out to some of our clients to kind of show the areas where it's most likely to happen, and they do happen more frequently than are measured and realized, because you have the whole planet out there, and trying to detect exactly where one might happen can be difficult. But they were able to create a formula here to look at that, and with some pretty good success out there as well. But it can obviously be a big issue, when even if you're just at the beach, at the coast, let's say you're in Maine or New Hampshire and you're at the beach, you can get those waves out there that are suddenly surprisingly larger than the rest of the sets. I mean, how many times have you seen at the beach where all of a sudden one wave travels a lot farther up the beach than you expect, and everybody gets all wet and they're scrambling for their stuff? So, the wave trains and wave frequencies, they can be quite variable, and so you got to kind of keep an eye out on that. But there's a whole, it's not a consistent, it's not just a perfect oscillation. There's times where you can get several in a row that are quite larger, and also times where all of a sudden it seems to stop, for instance.
That's amazing. Yeah, I thought maybe it's a little bit of an oxymoron there, predicting rogue events.
Yes.
But I mean, that's incredible how much that the science has advanced and your ability to sort of forecast some of that.
Sure. Yeah.
Another interesting question. This one's from Kevin. Does your company get called upon to offer your expertise in maritime accidents or investigations that might have been caused by weather?
Yes, yep. That we also do those forensic reports as well. It's a great question. So that can happen on both sides of the company, where there could have been an accident and or an incident that might happen. Maybe there's a collision. They need to know what the weather was during that time, or if it was a yacht, let's say, that might have been hit by lightning, we can pull up lightning strike data and be able to determine that. So we had one case for that, for example, was a vessel that was at a marina in Fort Lauderdale, and they were struck by lightning, and we were able to get the forensic lightning data and pretty much show that the strike had happened like literally exactly at the site of that sailboat. I mean, of that yacht. So yeah, we'll do those reports. We always want to check and make sure who's requesting the reports. We don't want to go against one of our clients, for instance, if there was an issue. So we check and make sure for that. But we do those forensic reports. They can come in very handy for insurance claims. And a lot of these vessels are using services like a private weather forecasting company for their insurance purposes, to know that they're doing their due diligence and have the best safety at sea. So they know they're using professionals to help avoid situations. And yes, there are other things like out there, it's changing topics for a second, but like apps and other things like that are more automated. But some of the insurance companies aren't accepting all of those, and those automated, AI type apps, they don't care if something happens to the vessel. It's all automated, right? But we've developed relationships, and companies like ours develop relationships with our clients, so that we want to make sure they're safe, and the clients really do appreciate when that happens, to help avoid those accidents in the first place. But yes, we definitely do those forensic type reports.
Yeah, I can imagine, and there's all sorts of ways, and I'm sure weather could be a factor, certainly, in a variety of incidents, including also other variables as well. Interesting question from David, actually asking about can you factor whale migration or other sort of migratory routes into some of your routing?
Yep, that's a great question. Yes, we do that because there are speed restrictions for vessels on the East Coast during some of the whale migration periods, like off the Southeast coast. They put a 10-knot restriction in for certain zones to help minimize or avoid the chances of collisions in there. So there's certain zones in the world that there's regulations that are put out for vessels to keep a certain speed. We don't track the individual whales, but there are definitely zones where the vessels are required to keep to a certain speed to help to avoid those types of collisions. Yep.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. And I'm sure all sorts of other restrictions, even non-whale related as well.
Yeah, they do a thing called notice to mariners, NOTAMs that go out. And what might also happen is something not quite similar, but another kind of thing to be aware of would be some of the rocket launches. off of Cape Canaveral because they need to clear the area in case there's any debris that comes down. So they will actually mark those on a map, send out to mariners, and we will look at that so that if we obviously saw a vessel in that zone during a time ahead of time, we could let them know. And even some of the space debris that burns up. There's an area in the southern Indian Ocean, I think, that has some debris potentially coming down from some dead satellites, and there's an area marked out to watch for burning space debris. So it's pretty interesting. Yep.
Jeez. It's a
Yeah.
lot to keep track of beyond just weather.
Yep. Yep.
Well, this is fascinating. I think three different people have asked in different ways whether or not you do work within freshwater, including specifically the Great Lakes. What experiences do you or others of your company have there?
Yep, we do that as well. Some of our clients will continue to sail or motor into the Great Lakes. They might take the long route, go up through Nova Scotia, up through Canso Strait, Gulf of St. Lawrence, on the St. Lawrence Seaway, and then into the Great Lakes to, let's say, go to Chicago for the summer. So that's definitely a location that they go to. And our commercial vessels too will also use us in the Great Lakes. Especially they'll use us at the fall, October, November. If everybody knows the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald that happened, we don't want to have that happen as well. So a lot of times the Great Lakes, the weather in the summer isn't terrible. We got to watch out for a lot of thunderstorms, for instance. That's kind of the main concern, big squall lines and derechos. Yes, we definitely do some vessels that would go all the way up there and then use us in those regions. And we do some races too, like the Mackinac Island race. We'll do that. We'll do some other smaller freshwater sailing races that can take place. So yeah, they'll use us in that area as well. So if a client came in and said, "Hey, we're doing another body of water, maybe they have Lake Champlain, we've done some forecasts for too." So in some of the more inland bodies of water that are smaller, they don't necessarily need a routing service because there's only so many places to go. But we'll forecast for that as well. Again, it's not going to be the majority of our forecast, but we definitely do some vessels that will take all the way from Miami, Florida to Chicago, the long way.
Yeah, that definitely seems like a long way.
It is, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Man, there's so many great questions here. I know we won't get to all of them. Maybe just a few more if your time still allows for me. Really some great thoughtful questions. Another one from Kenneth, who's wondering, what were some of the things, I mean, you touched on a little bit, but that you learned on your sailing experience that you've brought back to your current work beyond just, the street cred of, all right, I've been out there at least once.
Yeah, and that street cred was also really good to be able to talk to clients, say, look, I've been out there. I know what it's like to be in a gale. I know what it's like to sail around navigation hazards. I know what it's like to be on watch on the North Atlantic at 1 a.m., which is a very strange place to be if you've never done it before, being a couple feet above the Atlantic Ocean and kind of in the middle of nowhere. That's definitely an experience to have. So that is definitely part of it. But just learning what it was like to visualize everything, to really visualize, okay, we looked at those iceberg maps, for instance, but what does it actually mean? It's a grid map with numbers in it. But when you actually get to see what one of those icebergs looks like, it's like, oh, okay, that's what it is. And that was just one example. We saw about 5 other icebergs too while we were out there. And one quick thing about the icebergs that's really fascinating, of course, you're only seeing the top 10% of it. When they move close to the coast, they can grind ashore. They get stuck in the bottom of the continental shelf. And so they get stuck and then they'll melt out. And around St. John's, they actually go out and harvest the ice and they either bottle it for bottled water. That's because so you can drink 10,000-year-old water. And they also brew beer out of it too. So that you can try beer that was brewed with 10,000-year-old water. So the icebergs get stuck and grind ashore there, which is pretty fascinated for that. So yeah, learning what it was like out at sea, learning to see how a forecast is read at sea, what that means, to look at the numbers, and also just estimating wave heights. Because until you're actually out on the ocean, estimating wave heights, you're almost always twice as high as what it really is. You say, oh, that's a 6-foot wave. No, it's really only 3 feet. So then when you do the math, like, wow, what does a 10-foot wave really look like out in person? And on that gale, we got to see 8 to 10 foot seas. You saw the video of that, how towering they were over the vessel. I got to tell you though, steering the vessel in 40 knots of wind and 8-foot seas was a thrill of a lifetime. I'll tell you, that was, once I got the hang of it, I wasn't nervous. A captain was right there, next to me if something happened. That's quite the experience and something I'll never forget, going that sailing in those conditions by France, you know, like
Yeah.
off of Newfoundland. It's really, you know, it's really amazing. And that's another thing that I would also tell people too, is that the career meteorology, right? You never know where it's going to take you. You know, I had a great college experience. I had a wonderful internship on Mount Washington, which was always a goal of mine to be able to do that. And then to be able to go sailing up in Newfoundland. These are all things that I didn't necessarily think would ever happen. But for anybody considering career meteorology, if we have any students out there as well, you know, this career can take you to some really interesting places. Keep an open mind about it. It's not just storm chasing tornadoes. That's a small part of it. You know, you never know where you might end up at, and be open in your careers, be open in your experiences, and you can see and do some just incredible things.
Well, that's a perfect message. I know for a fact. I'm reading it, and I know people in the room here. We have some teachers. We definitely have some students in the mix, and you've even already just answered a question that Rena had more or less about, how you got into this, what the inspiration was, and I mean, yeah, did you think you were going to get into sailing? This was going to be your primary interest or day
Right. No, it was never something when I first got into meteorology, you know, I got into it like a lot of people do when you're 7 or 8 years old. You know, I was watching the Weather Channel, watching the tropical updates. I would run inside at 10 minutes to before the hour to get the position because we didn't have the internet. You couldn't just go log on and get the positions. You'd missed it, you lost it. So I'd have my parents got me a tracking chart when I was 8 years old. I would record the tropical updates on there. I was learning where Cabo Corrientes, Mexico was when I was 9 years old as a point for hurricane watches. But now I get paid to do it, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, what I did was I had a lot of interest in meteorology, and I wanted to have as broad of a possibility of getting a career and keeping all options open, because you can't just say I want to do just one path. You know, you keep your options open, and then opportunities will happen, and you get to know a lot of different people. You get to make connections out there. It's a small field, so also for students, like, reach out to your TV station, reach out to the observatories, look out to Blue Hill Observatory too, reach out to them, reach out to TV stations, private companies, the Weather Service, universities, and just get to know people and get to see their experiences, because they may have a job at some point. Remember that you showed interest in that. So, you know, but yeah, it's when I found about the job of weather routing and applied for it, I was like, marine forecasting around the world, that sounds really fascinating. And I had taken classes in global climatology. I did like learning about different weather systems around the world. And certainly here, not only do you get to do that, you get to learn pretty much every port in the world. And it makes you an expert on Jeopardy whenever there's an ocean or ports or islands, seas or shipping question. I'm like, these $2,000 questions, these are easy. I can answer.
Yeah. Oh, I can only I can only imagine.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, well, yeah, certainly you're blending more than just physics or math or any of those things. It's a variety of topics, obviously, that you're bringing to your job.
Absolutely. And it really truly is an art and a science. There's the strategy involved of the routing. There's the strategy of how you communicate to the clients. That's really the art in it. And then you have to have the science, but you can't overdo the science talking to a client. They just want to know what to do. They don't care that it's a 1040, millibar high.
Yeah,
They want to know what does that mean for them?
yeah,
Yep. Most do. Although you'd be surprised, quite a few of the clients can be very knowledgeable about weather systems.
and
So
I wouldn't be surprised if there's some of those folks on the Zoom right now too.
yes. Yep.
Likely. All right. Well, maybe just one last question here. It's a really great, it's a thoughtful one. I mean, you mentioned you've been now with weather routing for quite a while. You've been working as a meteorologist for quite some time, and throughout your career, I mean, have you found, at least as Lisa's asking here, have you found instances of extreme weather have increased as the climate has changed? Or I guess I'll open up even more broadly, just as our climate has changed, even just in these last 30 years. I mean, what are you noticing, if anything, just in terms of how it has impacted either, your day-to-day work?
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely interesting how some things have changed. I mean, one just example would be the tropical systems and how we can have, a few years ago there where we had, what was it, 30 plus systems, and we went 10 letters into the Greek alphabet. Like that had never happened before. And
Yeah.
it was just tropical in the Atlantic. It was just tropical system after tropical system. Then they all started sounding the same because the Greek letters, sounded pretty similar. And that was an example of a year that was just like, oh my gosh, is it ever going to stop? And just so out there, such an outlier type of year. And so much so that they actually got rid of the Greek alphabet alphabet names that started coming up. The Hurricane Center in the World Meteorological Organization to come up with, an auxiliary list of names. So that would be one thing. And just sometimes the unusualness of some of the systems, especially some of the tropical cyclones, and how rapid intensification for some of these has been the case. Systems that go from a tropical storm to a Cat 5 in 24 hours, things like that are just, we didn't really see much in the past. And they did happen, rarely in the past, but it just seems every year here we're breaking some weird record. Or even like this year, we had those strong Cat 5 systems, but we had very few landfalls in the US of any system, no hurricanes. And then we had a period where it was totally dead, and it was like the ocean was cooking. It was super warm, but it was just very stable and a lot of dust, and we just weren't getting tropical systems, even though the sea surface temperatures were off the charts warm across the entire Atlantic Ocean. But then when a system did form and tapped into it, I mean, boy, the rapid intensification that can happen. So that's just an example of that. It could also open up more passages in the Northwest Passage is another example. We've actually had a couple of yachts go up through that. We did one forecasting 10 years ago for an Arctic rowing expedition, and they got caught in a very rare July strong low pressure area in the north side of Alaska, which is usually, they don't get those in the middle of summer. So there's all these changes that are certainly happening, and the forecast models are certainly a lot better than they used to be, but you have to use your own knowledge and your own pattern recognition to try to get trying to realize, okay, what's not quite right, what might be some climate change that's affecting some of the forecasts. And eventually here, by doing so many forecasts over the years, probably 80 to 100,000 forecasts across the planet over the years, your brain just knows to recognize something. You've just seen that pattern before. And it's like, oh, you don't remember the date, but it's you've seen that situation, so what's kind of more likely to happen. So
Yeah, well, absolutely, and certainly, I think you're speaking on a few different levels why people obviously matter in weather, and certainly there are a lot of great technologies, but there are a lot of skill sets that people are bringing to the table there, especially as forecasters, and points of connection with relationships as well. Really important, I'm sure, in your job.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so grateful, Jeremy. Thank you so much for sharing all your expertise tonight. Just so grateful to have you on the program. For anyone who had those follow-on questions, please feel free to reach out. You can reach me as well if you didn't grab Jeremy's contact information over at education@mountwashington.org. If you enjoyed tonight's free program, we'd strongly encourage you to make a donation to help support programs like these over at mountwashington.org as well. You can find the donate buttons just there in the upper right-hand corner. And if you have any thoughts about tonight's program or suggestions for future programs, there is a survey that'll pop up in the Zoom window following this program or in the follow-on thank you email to folks who registered through Zoom. And then also be sure, join us for our next program on Tuesday, February 24th at 7 p.m. We're going to be hosting the nonprofit organization Climate Central, and they'll be sharing their work about communicating climate information in partnership with folks like broadcast meteorologists, journalists, and other trusted messengers. So make sure to register for that program, and you can watch any of the previous programs you may have missed over there at mountwashington.org. And thanks again, Jeremy. What a great presentation, and thanks to all of you for joining. Have a great night.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah, take care.